And so I think what's, I guess for lack of a better word, plaguing the parkour world right now is a lack of attention to volume for higher intensity work. So it's hard to convince, and I think this is probably true in other sports, but it's hard to convince an athlete to do lower intensity work. They only want to do the higher intensity work. And then, so like there is no like lower intensity conditioning day. There is no like aerobic recovery day. It's just, I'm either squatting, near maximal loads, or I'm out trying to do like the toughest challenges I can on the street. And there's not a whole lot of in between other than, oh, I took a day off.
Welcome to the Upside Strength Podcast, your number one resource for all things fitness and performance in Switzerland. Today, I'll be chatting with René Scavington, parkour coach and founder at Origins Parkour in Vancouver, BC. René has been immersed in the parkour and performance world for over a decade. He's based out of Vancouver, Canada, where he runs the day-to-day operations at his facility, Origins Parkour, where he also coaches beginner to advanced athletes. René continues to hone in on his own training practice to contribute to and make improvements in this fast-growing sport. He also co-founded a startup company called Sport Parkour League that continues to pave the way with competition events all around North America. Hey, René, it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so to give it a little bit of context, we met when I was in Vancouver. I was looking for a place where I could practice weightlifting, and turns out the only place that was cool enough to do that in my vicinity was a parkour gym that had a little weight room on the side.
With its own restrictions, yeah.
With its own restrictions, can't make too much. I think we got pretty creative with those drop pads and all that stuff.
Yeah, you definitely contributed, and it's still. It's mostly a women's community that comes in now to use it. Although, being at a time in the world where a lot of businesses are closed, you would appreciate what's going on right now because the businesses below us are still closed, and we're open, which means you can drop weights. You can drop weights right now.
Sounds like heaven. I was going to ask, are you still having issues with people coming up to say that it's too loud?
Yeah, not at the current time, but when they reopen, we'll be back to trying to be mice again.
Right. Right. So for people who don't know who you are and what you do, can you give some of your background and I guess how did you get into parkour in the first place?
Okay, so I guess I'll start with how I got into parkour, which happened in 2003, 2004. I was just at like my end of high school. So like grade 11 or 12. I honestly can't remember which one it was. But at the time I was more or less a media arts student who also really, really enjoyed the weight room. So we had, at my high school, we had a weight training class. So I was able to kind of start trying to, be the skinny kid that wanted to get bigger. And I found out about parkour through a bunch of friends who were into stunts and wanted to be stuntmen when they were when they got older. And they saw some of the original videos that came out of France. And we found a group at the time that wanted to meet up in Vancouver. And it was going to be like the first meetup in Vancouver. So I went out to that with the intention to just document and film, just get, cool clips from what they had shown me. And through following all the guys that, none of us knew what we were doing. They just saw videos on the internet. They saw other groups that started to put names to things. And I just was following along. And then some of the stuff I saw and thought that I might be able to do it. Some of the places we accessed, so we would try to find rooftops we could get onto and, just to kind of simulate what we had seen in the videos. And so slowly but surely, I just wanted to become like a practitioner myself. A couple of years into that, I looked at the mistakes I had made starting out. So I took, unnecessary bails from not necessarily knowing how stuff worked. And I just wanted to share and I wanted to coach. So I approached one of the municipalities in Vancouver and I started doing formal classes in 2006. I guess the rest from there is history, but from that point, I started pursuing like opening up my own space, which is originally started with becoming a personal trainer, so getting certified for that, and
Was
that
that
for about
before?
4 years.
Was that before you found parkour?
No, so I was when did I do personal training? Started probably 2007
Yeah.
till 2011. So that 4 year period, and then signed the lease for Origins in 2011, officially opened in 2012.
So tell us now about Origins Parkour. How did it come to be? I mean, it's a pretty unique place where, I mean, I'll let you describe it from your eyes,
Yeah.
but for someone from the outside who was never exposed to anything like that, it's a pretty cool place to be. And there's a lot of things going on. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So at the time, it was fairly groundbreaking. It was probably one of the three largest parkour facilities in the world. So again, this is from 2012. Now they're kind of a dime a dozen now, but Origins is quite special. Even today, we talk about it every day, where you're walking down Main Street, which is mostly uh, small businesses, shops, cafes, pubs, restaurants. That's Main Street, and there's this old, large heritage building that has this big neon sign that says "Bingo" on the side of it. And you kind of approach the building, and it's got these brick walls and everything. And there's a plaque that explains how the building was constructed back in the 1950s. But you would never suspect that the top floor looks the way it does, like with or without parkour. So the way to describe it to you is each floor is about 12-foot ceilings, but for whatever reason, the third floor has a 25-foot ceiling, and a massive 6,000 square foot hall, and then the sides make up the rest of the 10,000 square feet. What we did in the space is we completely took out any of the false walls, so that it's very open. We built all the parkour structures, so we have different towers that go up 12 feet, nothing really higher than that. So you still got a lot of room for the ceiling. It never feels like you're too close to the ceiling, even when you're up high. And then we have a giant mural painted on one face, and then throughout we've done over the years we've done more painting to kind of bring more color to the space and variety.
And I mean, your gym is, I don't know if it's unique or not in the parkour world, the fact that you guys have not only this big parkour open space, but you also have a weight room attached to it.
Yeah, so there's a couple of other gyms that have done that, where they have a section for strength training. It's not it's not widespread through parkour, like the idea that you have to train your body to be better at it. There's a lot of elastic and light youngsters that are just able to dominate the sport through their own means without doing too much of the strength and conditioning side. Although I do think parkour is getting pretty good with that, like more so than like no one thinks of skateboarding, for example, and thinks strength and conditioning, whereas a lot of even like I said, the gifted athletes in parkour still practice a bit, just probably not enough to our standards. But for me, bringing that into the gym space, I think I opened up originally with the title. It was going to be Origins Parkour and Athletics Facility. So it wasn't, and that was simply because I didn't think parkour would be enough to sustain the business. And the weight room itself has gone through different phases over the years in terms of size and like how we organize things. I'm always tweaking it a bit. And the equipment that was in there was from a studio that I had owned previously that was much smaller. I was running basically a personal training place out of a loft that I had, and that equipment came from there. Of course, the gym is actually more spacious than the loft, so we've been able to open things up a bit and then add to it as we go. But it is a little bit unique in terms of the parkour gym world, because most parkour gyms are just that. They're just obstacles. There's foam pits, there's mats, there's bars to swing on, there's walls to kick off of, but there isn't too much in terms of the strength equipment.
Is that something you saw right from the beginning, or the kind of the marrying of the strength and conditioning or the physical prep for parkour, or did it come later and then you were like, oh, I have that gym and I have that gym, I'm just gonna put them together?
So as I mentioned, when I started getting into parkour, I was already kind of a weight room rat, more on like the bodybuilding side of things at the time. But that changed when I started parkour, because what I quickly realized is that a lot of these other guys that I was meeting doing this, when it came time to climb up a wall or something, a lot of them just couldn't do it. Didn't have the strength to get up. Um, and then later started a time where I realized, some of the lifting that I was doing at the time, because even though I was kind of bodybuilding centered, shout out Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia. A lot of what I was doing at the time was, I was still doing the compound lifts. I was still doing squats, deadlifts, and things that would contribute to like my explosive power ability. So, right away I found out that I had a decent standing jump and decent relative upper body strength, and that all lent itself really well to parkour. So what I thought at the time was, okay, I don't have a lot of the, I guess, tenacity and fearlessness that some of these other guys that I came up with had, and what I could control more was how strong I got. So that became part of that obsession, and I mean, still really is. Like, I still want to be as fit as I can outside of my parkour goals.
And so, both from you as a parkour athlete and a parkour coach, how has your view of physical prep for parkour evolved since the early days until today?
Um, it I guess with physical prep, so like I said, when I started in the early days, it was what I was already doing, which was way too many exercises. Because I still wasn't even 20 yet, so I could handle the training load.
Good times.
Over time, that evolved to, there was a phase of body weight only, um, and then there was a phase of I got really into the Joe DeFranco's West Side for Skinny Bastards, and that whole side of programming, and that kind of opened up more so the world of, I guess, like intelligent strength and conditioning. So I don't know what came first from there, but that just started opening me up to a world of, okay, there's a more intelligent way to plan for this. um, and then from there it kind of went into, I'm still doing too much. I'm still doing too much of a strength phase thing. I really want to get better at this sport, so I have to be able to plan for that. And more recently, I've felt, I guess, in tune with what it should have been all along, in terms of the phases I'm going through. And I'm I just turned 34, so it's unfortunate to kind of have all the answers I feel now. When if I had them when I was 18, maybe things would be a bit different, but it's not the way the world works.
So let's get into the details on this. In 2020, with everything that you know and you've gone through, how do you usually recommend that a parkour athlete structure his training around not only the skill side of the sport, but then the physical side of the sport as well?
Yeah, so depending on where they're starting from, as you know, if someone is a novice both in parkour and in strength, so if they're not a very physically strong individual and they don't have a lot of technique, they can handle a lot more training load. So it's getting them volume. Actually, more volume is kind of what I aim for first with people, is trying to just get them both, I guess, psychologically conditioned to showing up more, but also physically conditioned to like handling more load. And I never get too much outside of the first couple of weeks. If someone's new to an activity, whether they're a kid or an adult, they might have soreness and things like that. But outside of that, it's harder to overload someone when they're first starting out. So that's kind of number one, is just getting them used to the idea of like, hey, if you really want to get better at this, this is how much you got to do it. You got to treat it. You got to train like an athlete. This has to be a day in, day out thing. And so, like with our we have a newer youth team program that we started up about a year ago, because that one was hit or miss in previous years. And this one's been a bit better because we selected the kids who were already attending a lot of classes. So it wasn't completely decided on talent. It was more about, are they already training a lot, and then can we go from there? So these kids, I guess, are a good example of the training recommendations, because with them, we're still basing it heavily around the movements themselves, but introducing mobility to them and certain things that are going to be more preventative injury. The oldest one on the team is like 14 years old, so we're not, putting a barbell on their back yet. But that's something I definitely start to recommend to older athletes. So in the past year, I put out some recommendations for off-season training, and through that, it's very, very simple, linear progression for strength, entering a phase of either, depending on how much time they have. So we try to keep it pretty open. It could be 6 weeks, could be 12 weeks, whatever. And then from there, it's you could either have a gradual transition back into an on-season, or you could continue with off-season gains and power, entering more of a phase that's going to have lower volume and incorporate more like explosive jumps, because that would be taking up part of the volume that you would previously be doing with your linear progression of strength. And that's pretty much it. So I don't feel like I do anything special. I feel like it's all fairly simplified in terms of like the recommendations I give people, with a couple of, I guess, considerations for parkour, because if they are still, it's hard to get someone, I guess, off the street. So that's where the joy comes from, is going out, hitting jumps, and that adds to the volume. So that is one of the trickier things with making recommendations for people, is if they already do jump a lot, it's like, how do we dial back the number of jumps? Sometimes the weather is an aid in that. So if you're from a place where, part of the year you just simply can't go out and jump, it's like, well, then that's pretty easy. We can take that as your off season and go. But if they're in a place like California, there is no off season. It's nice all the time.
There's no good excuse to do all the weight training inside.
Exactly.
Yeah, for some of the top guys in the sport, what do their weekly schedule look like in terms of training volume and frequency, whether it's again on the skills or on the physical side, just to give an idea?
I guess I would express it more or less as a spectrum. From what I understand, and from just conversations, and also, I guess, viewing their social media, so I know you get a little bit of an insight into some of their habits. You have everything from guys who are in their mid to late 20s who just go out 5 days a week and hit the hardest stuff they can, and it's very much like auto-regulated, because you have certain skill sets that require a lot of explosive efforts, and you have certain skill sets that don't really do that. And so I think some of them intuitively can find a balance there. And then I guess through survival of the fittest, also avoid injury. And then you have the other side where there are some elite names who you do see hit the weight room, but it's still the same thing. They're still trying to get out as often as possible, trying to hit like 5 or 6 days a week of intensity. And so I think what's, I guess for lack of a better word, plaguing the parkour world right now is a lack of attention to volume for higher intensity work. So it's hard to convince, and I think this is probably true in other sports, but it's hard to convince an athlete to do lower intensity work. They only want to do the higher intensity work. And then, so like there is no like lower intensity conditioning day. There is no like aerobic recovery day. It's just, I'm either squatting, near maximal loads, or I'm out trying to do like the toughest challenges I can on the street. And there's not a whole lot of in between, other than, oh, I took a day off here and there. So that's my general sense of the elite parkour scene, is high intensity days and then days off.
Does that reflect at all in the kind of the injury rate of those athletes? Do you see a lot of kind of overuse injuries from that maybe excessive volume of high intensity work?
It's a tough it's a tough thing to get any real data or like a real sense of. So I'm going to say that the training volume hasn't really shown for again, for the top guys, hasn't really shown, or the top guys and gals, hasn't really shown to produce a lot of injury. A lot of the injuries that you see are from acute incidents. So ankle injuries are quite common, and usually ankle and wrist is typically what is going to keep people away from parkour. So they short a jump and hyper flex their ankle, and that puts them out, or they miss up a movement and put a hand down at the wrong time when they should have tucked and rolled, and that messes up a wrist. And so that's most of what we end up seeing is people basically having to sit out because of an ankle or wrist injury. So not so much like I think like some overuse things or like lack of preparation things you might see in other sports, or like hamstring tears can be really big, or strains even. There's not so much of that in parkour. And I think it actually has a lot to do with a lack of competition. So if you imagine that if there was more of like a competition season, and a lot of these athletes had to basically perform outside of their comfort zone, because if all I'm doing as an athlete is like producing cool Instagram and YouTube content, I can really do whatever I want, right? There's no clock on me, and there's no opponent. Competition for athletes, I think that's the one thing I guess like saving them from a lot of injury is that as I was saying, if they did have some sort of event that forced them more or less, whether we're calling like an incentive for money or fame, forcing you to basically perform to your highest potential, I think that's where more injuries could potentially come about. But competitions are so few and far between, and a lot of the athletes, if I'm being completely honest, don't take them that seriously. So there's not a lot of incentive even to compete. It's just like, oh, I got flown here, or they're paying me to be here. And so you got some athletes that just kind of mess around the course, or don't really care too much if they win. So it's not a huge part of the sport yet. And I think that's one of the factors that helps, I guess, some of these top performers avoid injury.
I definitely want to come back to the competition piece. Before that, a couple more questions in the physical prep side. What do you recommend athletes track in terms of gym metrics, or like very general ones that are not necessarily specific to parkour?
I think tracking one's relative strength through you can do pull up, like pull up or chin up. I'm not really picky on like what sort of grip variation they're using there. They could use both, and it's always fun to have PRs in slightly two different movements, right? So that can be motivating. I'm more so a fan of a squat number than a deadlift number to determine whether or not they're improving something that's going to relate to their explosive strength. But more so, I always, I feel like I'm always trying to beat this into people, and it still doesn't stick, is measuring their basic maximal outputs in jumping, and having a few different variations they can do there. So a vertical jump, a broad jump, box jumps have their place as well. A bound, whether it's a jump into a single leg bound, or a jump into a bilateral bound, those types of things are missing quite a lot from the sport. So what we end up having is people that kind of go out and they see a jump that they think they can do, and then for whatever reason, because a lot of it could be psychological, that's going to massively affect your body's ability to perform. You're going to be tighter, or sometimes just simply hold back. So what will often happen is they'll return another day and be like, oh, I can do this now. I can do this jump now. And that doesn't really tell us if there was a lot of improvement. I mean, we could say there was, but it it's not as clear cut as just simply doing a simple test where I'm jumping on the ground, and I've removed all of these psychological aspects of completing the task. So that's my number one, is like making sure we have a lot of these simple outputs that we can measure. And then things like either a pull-up or chin-up test for reps, or one that's done for with like a weight. So you could do like a weighted maximum would also help, because there's quite a bit of climbing and pulling related to parkour. I guess on the for just thinking of basically like pushing for parkour, that one's I feel like the jury's still out on that one, and it's kind of interesting because like you'll see sprinters, for example, will bench press and do depletion push-ups. But I think one of the things that Charlie Francis used to say about incorporating that into sprint workouts is that sprinting doesn't have pushing, sprinting has pulling. And so he would often have his athletes bench press or do depletion push-ups well into the on season, because it was a strength component they could work without depleting them for the sprinting activity. And so that kind of made sense to me, but I still have a lot of questions around how that fits in. And so there are pushing movements in parkour where you're using your hands, but it's always propelled by the legs first. Whereas I can make a greater case for pulling for parkour, where there isn't as much propulsion from the legs that contributes right away to that. So pretty much pulling and jumping are the are the metrics.
And then in terms of specific parkour kind of skills that you guys can measure, I remember you guys set up this block in the gym that can move up, so you could do what are they called? Dinos, climb ups? I forget.
Yeah, so like a dino is a movement that comes from climbing on the culture. We there's a specific way that dinos usually occur in parkour, because if you're hanging onto a top of a wall that the wall face is flat, so your feet are just against a flat wall, you have no holds for your feet, and then you just have the top of the wall to hold on to. So you'll find that all over the place in the world. And occasionally you find ones where maybe you're grabbing a wall and there is a hand railing or something attached to the top of the wall, so you can dino up to the hand railing. And often these have fairly similar heights to them. So like handrails they have standard heights. So, once you get good at a certain measurement, you can go out and do that. But yeah, one of the things we set up in the gym was I had a welder fabricate for me something that we were able to mount to the wall that has 1 inch increments, and then a block that sits into those 1 inch increments that we can move up and down to basically create PRs in that sort of movement, which has been a fun thing to do as well. Although it still has like a psychological component sometimes, because if you're dynoing super high, it means if you miss, you're taking whatever the drop is. So like you're already hanging from a 7-foot high wall, and then if the block is like another 5 feet up from that, which guys can do, that's a 60-inch dyno. But if you miss the top, you're dropping now 12 feet to the ground. So sometimes we'll use mats and things to soften that.
To not get hurt. Yeah, you talked about the aerobic component, kind of the endurance side that is kind of neglected in parkour. Do you do any of this? And if so, how do you include it?
Yeah, so some of my more recent training, I'll talk about it first in the past, and then kind of what I'm doing now. So in the past, when I started parkour, I ran quite a bit. And when I entered in sort of like the West Side for Skinny Bastards sort of realm and stuff, I noticed that wasn't a big part of the program at first. And I think Joe DeFranco himself, I know, has been an advocate for tempo training and stuff since then. But at the time, it was like, okay, I'm going to cut running out of my training. I'm just going to do these like basically strength and power workouts. So what happened is, as soon as I did that, my jump increased, and I put on probably 5 pounds of muscle in a short amount of time. So this was like in my early 20s where I ate as much as I could and did like fairly intensive 5K runs 3 times a week, just always trying to like beat my time. So not a whole lot of like planning went into that. It was just try to run faster every time. And didn't see much increases in my jump, and couldn't put on any muscle. So that sort of changed when I switched focus. And then my weight started to go up even more, like my body weight, to a point where I'm about 5'9", and I think at most I was like 185 pounds. And it was really hard for me to get to 185 pounds. And just everything I was reading at the time, if you go on the internet and you start looking up strength and power, it's all kind of geared towards sports where you have like an opposing force, so like football. And so everything is kind of geared to weight gain. Whereas when I started looking more at track and field, it was like, oh, these guys are trying to, particularly like high jumpers and stuff, they're trying to lose weight. They're trying to be as lean and mean as possible. So that switched, and I just changed my diet, and that kind of sent my weight down. As far as the inclusion now of aerobic capacity, that had to be drilled into my head a little bit by like some people that I look to as mentors to really reap the benefits of. So, one is if you're entering some sort of tempo or recovery workout, that can help you prepare for further training sessions, but it can also help you have longer and, in my eyes, more meaningful sessions because your recovery in between efforts is going to be cut down, right? So I pride myself now as being the guy that goes out for the parkour session that can keep going, 3 hours into the session, because my legs are recovering, whereas everyone's else, we do a couple of sets of plyometric efforts, and everyone's legs are jelly and gassed, and I'm like, okay, I can go for another one. I have my limit, but I can kind of keep going a bit longer. So that has been something that has kept me motivated to do it, because let's face it, aerobic work is not really motivating. It's something you gotta I recently I've started to try to get it done in the mornings. So I have a field near my house that I go to for those tempo sessions, and typically what I'll do is 70% effort of like 100-meter sprint, which again is also some of the motivating factors. It's like, okay, I'm working on the technical side of just like my linear speed. And that'll I'll usually treat it more or less like also getting some calisthenic or rehab type exercises in. So I'll do my 70% effort sprint, do an exercise, and then walk back, and that's the rest period. And usually that workout will be only a half an hour. So that's the other thing, is like just telling yourself, I'm going to get this done. It's only going to be in a half an hour. Probably by about the 20 to 25 minute mark, I'm going to be starting to feel exhausted, but by the end of the 30, I'm going to feel great. And it's not too bad. It's just something that you just have to go out and do. So, making sure I actually write it down is what helps get it done. And this is something I'm trying to be a role model to other people that are trying to be more smart about their training. So that's a motivating factor as well. But encouraging them, write it down, schedule it, get it done. I think there's too much in sport training, particularly in a sport like parkour, where you have, I guess, there's not really organized teams or coaches or events. So you really have control of what you do. You can do it whenever you want. And I think it breeds this culture of, I'm going to do it later today when I feel a little better. No one wakes up. I mean, at least I don't. not many people wake up, ready to, to hit jumps or ready to go do some physical work. So you have to schedule it. And that's, for me, that's been like a saving grace, is if I can actually write it down, schedule that time of the day, and just show up and see what happens. And that's it.
What kind of volumes do you usually hit in those tempo sessions in terms of total distances?
Yeah, so right now I'm up to, I usually get in about 12 sets of 100 meters. So 12 reps of 100 meters with that exercise at the end of the walk back. I haven't done, I've been meaning to, I guess, sort of experiment with doing the runs without the exercise at the end, because the exercise is deplete. Like I'll finish a run and do 25 push-ups, walk back, do a run, hit, maybe like a unilateral exercise, maybe like a glute bridge or some sort of thing at the end, and then walk back. So some of those exercises at the end can be more like the push-ups, for example. Those can be a little bit more depleting, I guess, in the oxygen department. So I haven't actually played around too much with just doing tempo runs by themselves, which I think our mutual acquaintance Derek Hansen, he's an advocate of, and has plenty of material on that. I find it a good time to get some of the exercises that, again, I would also put off. I find it a good time to get those done is during those tempo sessions.
Before we move on talking about events and competitions around the world within parkour, what are the few mistakes or the biggest mistakes that you see people making or athletes making when it comes to physical prep for parkour?
Biggest mistake?
Yeah.
Biggest mistake that most athletes are making in parkour, as I've said, is not just basically skipping the low intensity work. So it's like I'm only motivated to do the high intensity work, and then if I'm not doing that, I'm just resting, which there's so much that can be worked on for the low intensity days that are also going to help you recover for the high intensity days and contribute to them. So tempo runs being one of them, where now I'm feeling like I can have a longer, more meaningful high intensity session because of the work that I'm doing on the lower intensity days. So yeah, if there's one thing that I can suggest for parkour athletes to, but I would say all athletes to put time into, is their recovery work, particularly in something meaningful like tempo sessions that would have a positive performance improvement when it comes to the higher intensity sessions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice. So switching gears towards the competitions, I know there's different ones in the parkour world, and not everybody does all of them. So can you kind of give the lay of the land of what kind of competitions there are, and who attends them, and where, and all that kind of thing?
Sure. So originally, the only competitions we would see in parkour were of like the freestyle side. So the type of competition, whereas so parkour, a lot of times in people's head, you have kind of one or two definitions. It's either like, oh, it's like urban gymnastics, or it's like, oh, isn't it that thing where you try to go as fast as you can, getting over walls and stuff like that. So the fast as you can competition model, which is a pretty simple competition model, didn't really start to surface or take weight until probably like, I guess, like 7 or 8 years ago. But outdating that, and what has always kind of run strong is like the freestyle competitions. So where it's more about performing the, I guess, most unique or most difficult movements, and then trying to put them together in some sort of like performance run, which has also evolved over the years. But what we try to do with my organization, Sport Parkour League, is we started very early defining the different specialties in parkour, because we realized that the most skilled guy, so if you're a skilled person who is just really good at doing maybe the biggest jumps, and then also making them, your technique is solid, and you do all these sort of, I guess, traditional techniques that over the years have become iconic for parkour, that didn't always lend itself well to a speed course. Some of the people early on that would win the speed courses were just the ones that were willing to like basically lean forward and just bomb the course. So there's more or less like a mental component. Not to say that technique is completely absent of it, but that's something that we realized early on, is like, okay, we have some people that are like seriously talented in these skill departments that are doing the most impressive things, that if we're only doing a speed competition for them, that doesn't really highlight what they're good at. So skill competitions started to develop. There's just a category we call skill. And so we have a little bit of alliteration to what we do. So we have skill, speed, style. So you have the skill competition, which if I have to explain it to a person that doesn't understand parkour, the skill competition is basically feats where you're going to see big outputs. So either big jumps, big like swings, things like that. And then there's what makes it special to parkour is there is a structural component where like the obstacle itself, might not make the athlete move in a linear fashion. They may have to like be off balance or something and still perform these outputs. So rather than just like, if I say like triple jump, for example, is like doing these big strides on the ground, we're trying to make those big strides happen, but on railings and tall walls and posts and just things that where there's like a very precise element to it. And so that's the skill competition, is again these big feats on these structures that require the athlete to move precisely. The speed competition is pretty cut and dry. We make a course, and so the athlete has to like move through certain checkpoints. What we try to do in our organization is we try to leave the course fairly open. So because we want to find out, is it faster to go over the wall or under the wall kind of thing, right? So if there's open areas in these courts, we like to make it like a proving ground. So we leave those things open. However, we usually try to design the courses in such a way that incentivize someone to take a more exciting route. So if there's a big gap to be jumped in the middle of the course, for example, we'll make it so that someone could potentially take a different route, but it wouldn't be as fast as the high line, so to speak. And then we have style, which, as I was explaining, is more the acrobatic moves or the creative movements. And what's happened over the years with that is athletes have just got better at linking these things together in sort of like a thoughtful way. So rather than doing a trick and then running over to another spot and doing another trick or pausing, kind of like how you'd see like a gymnastics routine, though, like a gymnast would do a tumbling pass across the floor, pause, salute, do the whole thing, and then tumbling pass in the direction. We don't like that anymore. What we want to see is kind of like an unbroken line. So on the courses, we'll try to design courses to be fairly dense for structures. So there's lots of structures to interact with. And the athletes are then challenged with trying to make a line that doesn't have breaks in it. So like each movement is punching into the next movement. And athletes are just getting better and better at doing that. And it's a lot more exciting to see than, again, pauses in between, because it's just so incredible to watch someone do a really hard move and then without any breaks, hit another really hard move after. So those are our three categories. We have the skill, speed, and the style.
Do you feel like that format has been kind of taken up and, let's say, validated or accepted by the community as a framework that kind of works for everybody? Because I know there's kind of different strains of thoughts within the community, and oh no, this is parkour, but this is not, etc. Do you feel like your model with those three kind of different subcategories, does that cover everything, or do you feel like there might be something missing still?
There's always a little bit of suggestion from athletes in terms of like how we could change it up a bit. There was like this one argument, for example, where certain athletes felt that the rounds that we have 3 rounds in our style competition. So the first one I've kind of already described as being connecting a line together, whereas we have a completely separate round where it's just do one move, like your biggest one move. And many athletes have felt like, well, this doesn't belong in the same competition. It should be 2 separate competitions. And then they'll say, like the parkour events, they'll say skill and speed are 2 separate things. My argument for that has always been that a speed course is actually not reflective of what people practice currently. So it's not actually parkour as much as it fits the traditional parkour definition. It's not actually parkour. The skill event is more or less what parkour actually looks like as it's practiced on the street. In fact, it is the truest to parkour practice is the skill event. So yeah, we get all kinds of different suggestions all the time, and we've because we're not a regulated organization, we're just basically a business startup. We have been able to modify and evolve our competition over the years. So we've been doing the skill speed style thing for 7 years now, and it's looked different, a little bit different every year. We've added rounds, we've taken away rounds, we've changed what a round looks like, and that's all been to basically meet audience needs, what we feel like is going to be entertaining, and also to meet what we want athletes to enjoy the experience. We don't want the competition to be like a punishing thing where they look at the course and they're like, oh, this is going to hurt, that sort of thing. We want them to be like excited to compete.
What has been the response of the public in regards to everything that you're doing to kind of push the sport, develop education around it, and the competitions as well? Do you feel like the public is slowly catching up as to what is parkour and as a sport, or do you feel like it's still quite a niche kind of sport?
I find it tricky to always sort of get a feel for it. It's some people will say like, oh, it's growing a lot, and sometimes I'll feel like, well, maybe where I'm sitting, it's maybe hit a standstill. I think actually parkour is at a bit of a standstill compared to the growth. And there's some metrics you can use, such as like a Google search, and you can see how often parkour is being searched from 2004 to 2015, or for example, to the way it is now. And there was a certain point where it surged and it was going up, and it's more or less leveled out right now. And I don't feel like that is an end of the growth. I just think it's a natural plateau that is going to last for a bit, and then it'll probably pick up again. A lot of street sports or alternative sports have seen similar growth. So skateboarding had a initial surge, and then it completely died out at a certain point where it was like, oh, you skateboard? Isn't that like yo-yoing? Isn't that just this sort of thing? And now it's massive again. Skateboarding is absolutely massive again. Similar one is also, to me, is breakdancing. Breakdancing or b-boying, as it's often referred to, is that picked up, at the end of when hip hop first developed at the end of the disco era. And then it became this kind of silly thing where actually it was, you see references where it's like, oh, breakdancing, that's so corny. That's and then it had this huge surge, and now there's like tons of TV shows that have lended to that as well. Right. And I think we're seeing similar things with parkour. There's chase tag is becoming more popular, and it's very much being designed in a way that positively reflects on parkour. My only gripe with tag is that it's still not parkour. It's its own thing. So they can design courses that encourage obstacle interaction and non-linear movement with that. So that, someone who's just like a sprinter and only does linear speed probably wouldn't dominate. It would still be better off if you're a parkour practitioner. But again, it takes away from the sport in a way where what we're doing with our competitions is reflecting the sport, whereas tag is kind of changing the sport, so to speak. Whereas like, some of my concern is where if tag gets more popular than parkour, where does that leave the market for parkour to continue to grow?
Yeah, I mean, you said you include speed runs in your competitions, and you said by your standards that's technically not parkour. How do you define parkour? What is parkour for you?
Oh, that's always a tough question now. It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. It's always been kind of funny to be part of a sport or like subculture that has like an identity crisis, because it's lumped in with all these different sort of things. And then there's been TV shows and memes and stuff that have come out over the years that have kind of changed public perception of it. But I mean, really parkour. So we kind of start with like the initial definition that used to be touted by like the French practitioners, which is it's just like it's efficient movement. We're trying to find ways to quickly and safely, get over and through urban environments typically. So it's typically an urban environment thing. You can do parkour like in trees and stuff, so to speak, but it's typically an urban environment thing. And what's kind of what set it apart from like obstacle courses, for example, because obstacle courses have existed for a long time. So what kind of defines parkour as like different from that is, well, there's never been like a specific mindset on just improving at that. Obstacle course was just kind of like, okay, certain military practices will have, their soldiers have to climb ropes and get through things, but there was never like a focus on that. It was just like a test you had to do, right? So parkour is a focus, and through that focus, we have developed our own techniques and our own understanding of what can be faster and what can work. But beyond that, what parkour has kind of grown into is much like skateboarding. It is a street subculture or a street activity where you're simply trying to find challenging ways to interact with structures. So if I had to kind of neatly package parkour into a sentence, is that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to use your body to creatively interact with structures and create challenges. So there is a creative and freestyle element to that, and then there is also like a utilitarian aspect to that, where it's like you could practice in either direction. And to kind of like further, I guess, help people understand, if you took something like skiing, for example, you can straight downhill, you can cross country, you can also freestyle. There's freestyle and skiing, right? And it's all part of the same culture. Everyone goes to the same mountain to do these things. That's what it is. It's actually very, very close to ski culture of all things. That's I feel like that one actually is the closest in terms of what practitioners can do, because you can be all around in skiing. You could do both of those things. You could do some tricks. You could also just try to ride fast, or you could do just one of those things. And parkour is very similar like that.
Do you feel that it's just a time thing in terms of maturity of the community when it comes to just accepting that it is one thing, but there are different there are different ways to interpret it and do it with the environment that's available, so that like in skiing now people are at peace. They're cool with, hey, he's doing downhill, he's doing cross country, he's doing big air and slope style and whatnot. And maybe in parkour it's just a matter of time until people accept that kind of framework.
Yeah, within parkour, it is it's always has been and still is unified. So in terms of like practitioners, like you can have a practitioner who mostly does freestyle aspects and a practitioner that mostly does utilitarian or traditional parkour, sometimes it can called, and they can go out and train together. Like I do mostly like traditional, and I can go out and train with a guy who does freestyle, and kind of play off of each other and learn from each other a bit, because it is fun to explore both, and they both can be beneficial to one another. But we're looking for this. The thing is, we're looking for the same spots, and some spots may lend themselves better to one or the other. But part of like the pursuit of challenge, which parkour is, whichever way you're practicing it, you're still in this pursuit of challenge. So to back away from a spot because it doesn't fit your style or your way of practice is not something looked at well in parkour. That's weakness. So if I go to a spot and I say like, oh, this is a freestyle spot, all we have is like big blocks and grass and stuff, for me to simply not want to train there or not want to explore it is a weakness. I should be able to rise to the challenge of finding a creative way that fits my practice.
Sounds very much like climbing culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't actually, I'm not actually well informed on how, like I'll mention skiing, I'll mention climbing, I'll mention skateboarding, but I'm not really deep into those cultures to understand the similarities. I go off of what, friends who, who do them tell me, and what I, what I end up seeing, but I'm not very immersed in them.
Yeah, it's what came to mind was simply just looking at the features, being like, oh, I think that might be possible. Let's try it out and see how far we kind of go with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think from what I've seen for climbing, there's not a lot of what we call like freestyle in parkour. There's not a lot of freestyle in climbing where like they might have an event that they call freestyle or something, but it has a different meaning. Freestyle in our sense is like you're no longer trying to complete a route. You're trying to do things that are creative and expressive. So like I don't see a lot of climbers getting on walls and like trying to do like something expressive with their body. It's usually like let's do this route, not like let's try to do it really weird. Although there might be some of that. I don't actually know.
Yeah, I'm picturing a bouldering wall and somebody just going up to the middle of it and then trying to do some awkward moves to get across without necessarily, like you said, just going straight for the top or something.
Yeah, like if climbing had a freestyle element, I feel like it would be like a cross between climbing and pole dancing. And I don't mean necessarily the dancing aspect. I mean like the holds and the positions. So like if you were to be doing freestyle climbing, to me, it would mean that you would do like maybe a move, but then you would like hold a flag or something off of two grips and then, turn yourself upside down for no reason and stuff like that, which could all be very interesting and impressive. I don't see a lot of it. Not to say that it doesn't exist. There could be like some guy who's interested in climbing that is listening to this and is like, oh no, that's the thing. We do that. So I have no idea.
Where do you see parkour going in the future?
Where do I want to see it going, or where do I see it going?
Both. Let's start with the first one. Where do you want to see it going?
So where I'd like to see parkour embrace competition more. There has been pushback on competition because either, I guess, people who are already elite in one area or another feel like the competition doesn't represent what they're good at enough, or it just represents this whole new feeling of I didn't really feel like I was competing, even though I may have been in some way with like my notoriety, but now I actually have to compete. But I would like to see competitions just be embraced more and start becoming more of a normal part of the subculture, because I feel like competition will put more eyeballs on parkour, and it will give athletes an avenue to, because of the greater audience, it will give athletes an avenue to be able to quit everything else they do. Maybe if they have a side job and just do parkour, right? So that's kind of number one for me that I'd like to see more of. I think parkourers are doing an exceptional job in utilizing different media. So like whether it's different cameras, drones, editing tricks and stuff like that. Like parkour is like very much on top of trying to make exciting videos to the point where it's almost been seen too much of. Like, everyone has seen like the crazy action parkour video like already enough times. So that's almost getting played to like, I almost wish that parkour would take a break from exposing itself so much. So I feel like it sells itself short. So you have all these like athletes that are basically trying to make a living off of Instagram, whereas a professional basketball player, Instagram is like a sub outlet for them. They don't need to like check out this new like jump shot I did, or check out this dunk, whatever. Like you don't actually even see it. You see pictures of basketball players like with their family, with their new car, with their whatever, and with their sponsors, and they're still making money off of it. But their real profession is not Instagram. Their profession is playing their sport. And so I would like there to be more outlets for that in parkour. It's just hard because like that is an easy and natural like avenue for a lot of these for younger practitioners to get into, because they're already using it. They're already using these apps and these mediums. So why not try to make some money off of it. Again, the problem is that I feel like the dollar amount you can make per post as like a parkour athlete is just not enough for the effort being put in for, if it's tricky. It's like if someone, so if a number of like top athletes went on a strike, so to speak, said like, okay, we're not gonna post as much anymore. We're just gonna, like save these big moments for like a bigger video or for performance. Someone who's like not quite as good, but to most people good enough, is going to do it. So it's like the jobs will always go to the sponsorship opportunities through these like, I guess, quickly digestible mediums will always go to someone if the top people aren't willing to do it. So that's what I'd like to see with parkour is parkour athletes just hold back a bit on what they're putting out there, and for competitions to start to take over as one of like the avenues for performance, so that you almost get a sense of having to wait to see your favorite practitioner. Because that's what's so big about sports, like particularly right now, if you think of like COVID-19 and the effects, if you're a fan of sports, you're just like, oh, I just can't wait to see this person play again, right? So much of the build up, particularly for like fight sports too. Like so much of what gets people into fight sports is the build up for this event that's going to happen. Like the heart grows fonder as you don't see this person anymore. So whereas no one is growing fonder for parkour. It's just like, oh, I've seen it all. I feel like that's the problem. So that's where I'd like to see parkour to go. Where I think parkour is going to go is I think we're going to continue to see parkour athletes use different like social medias, whether it's whatever's the hottest one now. So if it's TikTok, if it's Instagram, whatever, they're going to continue to use these things to try to develop a fan base and connect with brands that could, have some sort of mutual relationship where they can, make some money. And that could be YouTube is getting bigger too. So, and a lot of athletes taking advantage of that, where you're going to see more and more parkour vlog content. So there's some teams that do that very well right now, where they have a lot of vlogs up, where it's just like a day in the life, or we're going to go out and sesh, and they're able to show a bit of their personality, which is what people attach to. So there's some growth that way. But I do think the competition aspect is also going to grow. There's a lot of players in it now. So we didn't even talk about like the Federation International Gymnastic, which is trying to overtake a large part of parkour. You have organizations like myself, and then I can name countless others that are trying to basically push competition forward. So we're definitely going to get that. But I think we're going to get both. We're going to get athletes that are just trying to, make the viral content, and that's going to be like their avenue for making a living. And then you're going to have the competitions on top of that.
If you could talk to the younger version of yourself when you started parkour, what advice would you give yourself?
Find a direction early, and one that I enjoy and is true to me. Because I think I wasted a lot of time just trying to figure out really like what, and it was an interesting part of parkour that kept me into it, but I really didn't have a direction for like, okay, this is like the skill set I want to get better at. It's like you can double down on your strengths is something that is beneficial to all athletes. Like you still want to work on your weaknesses, but double down on your strengths, because like that's what's going to make you great. So that's the advice I would give my younger self, is like, okay, what are your strengths? Let's double down on this, because they're going to be more enjoyable to practice anyways, and you can still work on your weaknesses. But I guess I spent too much time trying to keep up with the culture, and there were wasted times, wasted sessions where I was trying to work on things that weren't really helping me. And I guess, don't try to do less volume, I guess would be another one. At an early age, pull back on the volume a bit, because it'll give you better results in terms of output.
So for anybody out of the public who's interested in learning more about what you do at Origins, or for athletes that want to know more about the competitions that you put on, where can we find more info about all that?
So originsparkour.com is actually, we're growing that website. We're about to, in the next couple months, we'll be launching an online platform that was a long time coming. And I guess through the current times that have put us in a state where it's like, okay, we might not be able to just operate a gym and make it profitable anymore. It's a contingency plan, but it's also something that we've wanted to do for a long time, which is have an online training platform. We found a way to basically do it that is going to be I feel more comprehensive than anything else out there. So that'll be coming advertised through originsparkour.com very soon. You can follow me on social media platforms is at Res Origins. That would always be a follow is always nice there. I try to be have a variety with what I share there. So I try to share information about training, but also just what I'm doing athletically. So if I hit new jumps or challenges, I try to put it there. But I also try to have a little bit takes here and there on what I feel like is moving around in the parkour world. So those two places, originsparkour.com and at Res Origins can be followed.
Man, it's been a great pleasure to catch up with you and get your take on all those topics. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Talk soon.
All right. Cheers.